All right, well, welcome everybody. This is a session I've really been looking forward to hosting. It's collaboration in the age of conflict. We've talked a lot in this conference so far about how much it takes all of us rooted together, and really our work in our spaces requires this collaboration. And today's an exploration of ways in which that has happened. And before we get started, there's two things I want to say. One is that this session is generously sponsored by UCANR. They're tremendous partners, and we're very grateful for their support. The other I want to say is personally, I want to just express my own gratitude to all of the folks who I've been able to collaborate in my work with at CNPS. I've learned so much from many of you, many of the partners here at this conference, and we really are better together. So in that spirit, I'm going to get us kicked off right away. We have 5 sessions we're cramming in today. We are not taking questions after, not 5 sessions, 5 presentations. We're not taking questions right after each presentation since we are trying to get the most speakers in, but our speakers will be up here at the end of the presentation. You're free to come up and ask questions, and if we end up with a little bit of room, I'll open it up for questions at the end for any of our speakers. All right. So first off, we're going to talk about cultivating biodiversity in San Francisco's Western Ecological Corridor. We have Jennifer Cooper, Solange, Guillaume, and Beth Cataldo here with us today.
Hi, I'm Solange Guillaume, and I'm a landscape architect, and I work with San Francisco Public Works. I'm just going to do a quick introduction here.
Hi, Jennifer Cooper, Landscape Architecture Bureau Manager at Public Works.
And I'm Beth Cataldo. I'm the volunteer chair at the Yerba Buena chapter of CNPS. And that chapter is San Francisco and northern San Mateo. And so today we're going to tell this story about how we partnered on a pilot block of native plants on Sunset Boulevard in San Francisco in a project whose long-term goal is to create a biodiversity corridor from Lake Merced to Golden Gate Park. So Solange is going to start. She's going to give you a little history, so all of you might not know our Sunset Boulevard. And then the 3 of us are going to talk us through this whole story, and hopefully it will inspire you.
All right. So starting with a little bit of history about the boulevard. Sunset Boulevard and the Sunset District are on the western side of San Francisco. The area of the Sunset neighborhood in San Francisco was pre-European colonization a vast dune landscape. So in this photo, you can see approximately here, Sunset Boulevard kind of starts about a mile to a mile and a quarter from the shore. And at the very edge of this photo right here, you can see the edge of Golden Gate Park at kind of its early inception. So the project that our group's going to share about today was eventually located in these dunes. This image you can see right here is looking south down the coastline. And from about 1920 to 1945, Carl and Fred Gellert and Henry Dolger were the primary developers of the Sunset District. So Sunset Boulevard, let's see, I'm going to pop through this slide here. This is just one more image of the Sunset Dune areas, but you can kind of start to see the development of Sunset Boulevards and these the neighborhoods that are being built around it. So it was kind of created in the style of an East Coast boulevard with grass and tall trees, and this is what it looks like today. Mostly the trees are Monterey cypress and Monterey pine. The large medians on either side of the boulevard are 90 feet by 900 feet, and they buffer the space between handsome residences and the boulevard. And in 2014, just giving you another image of what this boulevard, so you can see the medians on either side of where the traffic is. And in 2014, even though these pictures show pretty lush grass, the drought of 2014, the city of San Francisco had to radically reduce its water use. And this was precipitated by the state of emergency declared by Governor Jerry Brown. So when water was cut off to the boulevard, many of these trees, which were planted in these early inception of the design of the boulevard, which would have been like around the 1930s and 40s, they started to senesce. And they died, and they needed to be removed. And not all the trees are gone, obviously. You see a number of them here, but this is a lot thinner as a canopy than what it used to be. And so during the summer, the trees were dying, the grass was brown, and the community became really unhappy with the state of the boulevard. And so from that point, that's kind of where we came in around 2018, 2019. The community was unhappy with the situation of what they were seeing, and we were being tasked to create something different. So I'm going to pass the mic off to Jennifer for the next section.
Thanks, Solange. So in 2019, the former director of Public Works came to me and said, Jen, we need a drought-tolerant master plan for Sunset Boulevard. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds great. But as soon as the team and I looked at it, we saw that it was really should be a biodiversity corridor, right? It's connecting two major parks, including a water body. I think as a landscape architect or anyone interested in native plants and ecology, you would probably immediately look at the map and say, oh yeah, that should be a habitat corridor. And so I feel like this is one of those moments in city government where it was really nice for me, with my limited power, to be able to say, okay, instead of a drought-tolerant master plan, it's a biodiversity master plan, and that's also drought-tolerant. So it met the goals of what I was asked to do, but we were able to tweak it just a little to make it something that would be much more beneficial for both the human and non-human users of San Francisco public space. And so we also looked at transportation. We looked at adjacent land uses, where there's schools, libraries, other public uses along the boulevard. And we had multiple community meetings. And so the community meetings were really fascinating. San Francisco has a very vocal populace, and there's always opinions on every issue and every side of the issue. And so for this particular space, we had folks that had, bought their house 40 years ago, and when it was green with trees, looked kind of like a golf course, well mowed, always green, and that's what they wanted to see. And then we had folks from CNPS show up who wanted it to be absolutely San Francisco genetic native 100%. And so I had these two constituents that we both had to serve, and we took more of a yes-and approach to this because, as Solange mentioned, it's a huge space. It's 2.5 miles long, these huge double medians. I think there's a little bit of space for everybody, but we really wanted the focus to be on, restoring this as, well, not restoring it. I guess it never really was a habitat corridor in the way we're suggesting. So what we did was we said, okay, maybe we could have some lawn, and there's program uses why you might want a lawn. Your kids want to kick a ball. You want to take your dog on a walk. And so we started to think of it in terms of 3 different landscape types, also considering how Public Works would be able to maintain it, right? We didn't have a fleet of gardeners to be doing this, and so we had to keep it simple. And so we looked at where to put lawn based on program. So, where is it sunny? Where is it flat, and where is it adjacent to other, potential public uses? And so that's where we decided to have lawn that would be mowed on a regular basis, and then everything else would be habitat. So we had wildflower meadows that would only need to be mowed once a year, pretty easy, and then coastal scrub that once set up, would need very little maintenance. So that's how we started to look at it. And also, I'm sure you all have run into how to get communities to get used to what native landscapes look like. They're not always going to look perfect, and what does that mean? And so for us, we were referencing an article called, Messy Ecosystems in an Orderly Frame? I think that's what it was called. You guys probably know that one, and we really love that because it's a great way for us to frame our work, because I think when people see scrubby native landscapes, they assume it means you're not paying attention to it, that you're not maintaining it, you, the city, are not doing your job, this looks messy. And so we thought, well, you can probably see on here a little bit, we had a mow strip all the way around, kind of just the size of a Public Works riding mower, so that they knew that it wasn't neglected. You actually have a purposeful frame around it. And so we designed these pilot blocks, some examples of what the boulevard could look like as more of a native habitat, and we were ready to get capital funding. We were this close to being approved, and then 2020 happened. And so COVID happened to everyone, the pandemic, and so our funding was reallocated to kind of more emergency, critical uses, which we understood. But we didn't want to give up, and we felt like we had worked so hard with the community to come to a consensus master plan that included so much habitat, and this is just a fun image for you to enjoy of some of the charismatic micro and megafauna, doing a soapbox derby, because they used to have soapbox derbies out in the boulevard. So this is one of our postcards for what we called the Sunset Boulevard Bio Derby. And we were having a bio blitz. And so we thought this was another innovative thing we could do in city government that isn't commonly done, was to try to get some sort of baseline data for what's on the boulevard right now, so that when we improve it, we could actually say we improved it by, and there's 500% more of X, Y, or Z, critter. So, we wanted to be able to have that. And that's what we started, I think, through the community meetings. We started to run into CNPS members, who would come to the meeting and advocate. And also I was running into them at other meetings for other public projects where they were also passionately advocating for native plants. And so I realized, I was like, I don't think they realize we're also interested in this. So let's, instead of doing the public comment at the meeting, let's actually have our own meeting separately. So I invited them to the office. We talked about Sunset Boulevard, what should we be looking at? Because I think the membership at CNPS has so much knowledge. So it was really great to share that knowledge. And then at the Bio Blitz, I know Beth was there, and she saw that one of the gardeners was already doing some wildflower meadow seeding, and so started to talk to him, talked to our interim director, Carla Short, who put her in touch with Solange. And so then, this real, I think, personal relationship started to develop, where we could actually have these conversations in a more productive way.
So that's it. We got the phone numbers of the people who were making these decisions. So that was kind of a turning point. So then in June, we started meeting. We had Zoom calls, right? If you remember back in 2020, there was not much to do, especially, during that summer, we had no vaccinations. So we had a lot of people looking for some projects. And so we met every 2 weeks for about an hour, and we decided who's going to do what. And so I did want to just, bring up this partnership. Who did what in this relationship, if you can't tease it out of our explanations. So SF Public Works, so they gave us permission, as she said, I think there's a lot of CNPS members who would have gone out and planted these gardens on their own if we knew we wouldn't get spanked for that. But so they granted us permission to work and put native plants in the garden. They created the design for the garden, so Solange did that. They provided soil and mulch, tools, toolbox, gloves, sanitizer, wheelbarrow hoses. The staff made up the holes with augers, and they pick up the weeds with detritus. So what did we do, you ask? We purchased the plants. So we raised $7,000 to buy the plants. So as Jennifer said, they had no funding, and we came in and said, well, what if we bought it? What if we give you the volunteer hours, and what if we put it in? So that was really the negotiation. And that was their problem to solve, right? So we were there helping solve the problem rather than coming up government and asking them to solve it. So we managed the plant purchases, delivery, planting. We brought in and managed all the volunteers. We used social media and other tools, and then we managed the upkeep. So we did have a 3-year MOU where we're up there weeding, watering for 3 years. And then we all decided about the plant palette, so Solange is going to talk about that. We managed pre-planting and planting days, and really importantly, we communicated with the community and supervisors about this work, because you'll see later on, this is not a one deal. It actually paid off on the end because we were going out and talking to people about this garden, advocating for additional gardeners and resources. So we also had other partners. I just want to shout out Climate Action Now and Nature in the City were also out there at similar times doing this kind of work.
So to speak very briefly about the plant palette, so we were mostly planting coastal scrub, coastal meadow, and coastal woodland plants. We had a lot of input from the California Native Plant Society Yerba Buena chapter about what those plants could be. And we also, as we put together this palette, it was really a weird time to try to do something like this. We had had trouble sourcing all, in a typical project, you would source all your plants from like one nursery, or you'd contract grow. We had piecemeal, like pieces of plants coming from, not pieces of plants, but plants coming from like multiple nurseries. Plus, speaking of pieces of plants, some of the CNPS members were growing cuttings. And so from all of that input of like what's available and what's CNPS growing, we put together a planting plan. And this planting plan was kind of a moving target. It ended up changing like 3 times because we found that some things weren't available, and it was just kind of, it was interesting. It was very tricky. And so we're covering 2 areas of plantings of 1,000 square feet approximately each in these medians. And so this is just an example of a piece of the plan. And Beth, who is an amazing organizer, like sorted out what's coming from where. And that's like her amazing color coding on this side. Without her organizational skills, like this would be hard to put together. So that's our quick blip. And then this is what the site looked like before we actually got the plants in the ground. Those trees in the front are new, and those are from Climate Action now. Those are Laganaria. And you can just see another couple snips of those images.
And then, so from September to October, we actually bought the plants. And this is Bob Hall, the man who's not on the stage. But Bob has done a lot of advocacy about plants in these meetings that Jennifer saw, CNPS members. Bob Hall is one who's been doing this for years, so I do want to give a shout out. He couldn't make it today. But that's Bob, and that's kind of, as Solange said, there were 7 different nurseries, and some of them we had to buy early, and Paul Buscal is also a main mover in this. He took care of plants for 3 months, so it was definitely a Rubik's Cube of plant purchasing. And then we planted, right? So here's a site. The Public Works would drop the mulch, drop the soil, and then Solange and I spent 2 days out there putting in the flags. And then we use sheet mulch, right? So volunteers, we had more than 15 volunteers come out over 7 planting days and did the sheet mulch, dug the holes, and then here's, I think, Eddie and Noreen. So Eddie is our chapter president. Eddie Bartley and Noreen Whedon, they came out, and Bob is also there. So this is afterwards, right? See these small little plants? Okay, we'll give you an after. So that was the day. I mean, we had great turnout. People came from the East Bay because they were looking for something to do during COVID. And it was really exciting to see all these people come out, put on their gloves, put on their masks, and Public Works brought out all the tools, and we would just kind of dig through it for from the end of October through December 16th. We planted these plants. And there's the board, that's Noreen in the back, me, Paul, and Bob, and then I think Eddie Bartley is taking a photo. So this is another area. This is what it looked at after we planted. So 2 months. So we're talking 6 months, quick reading down of what we had here. So we had 58 volunteers, 6 months. I mean, we're working government nonprofits. That's a pretty good time frame. 1,142 volunteer hours, over 1,000 native plants, $6,500. Where'd that money come from? So we have some nice benefactors. 4,000 came from the chapter, and then some board members just donated their own funds because we wanted to see this pilot block succeed. Okay, and so lessons learned.
All right, so lessons learned. Have a dedicated project manager to make it go smoothly. We've been relying on a gardener who got transferred to another part of the city, and so then Beth and Bob and Solange really had to carry the weight of just all the coordination that had to be done. So that was their request to us, was that the next time we do it, to have an official project manager. Expect the unexpected. Even though Solange was showing pictures of dunes, there was chert. And man, you could not get through that with a shovel. We had to, so pre-drilling holes is best, or be prepared to pre-drill the holes, and we have an auger that we will provide next time. Sheet mulch with paper does better to deter weeds, but you need a steady group of volunteers to get the process down. You don't want to be teaching people every single time you go out there, so it's good to have a steady group. Sheet mulching with rolls of paper before planting is really the way to go. I think we were catching this catch can, and everyone had lots of Amazon boxes, so we were just bringing our own cardboard and trying to put it around the plants, and it was just much too hard. So the next time we did it, we just did it with rolls before planting, way easier. You do need to water the first year for sure, but watch out for weedy natives. So our lupin and bee plant just went nuts. The lupin was sprawling all over. It was so happy to have the water, but it was starting to crowd out other more sensitive, slower growing plants. So we just had to keep an eye on that. And in the future, we just might give the lupin more space to let it be itself. Sensitive plants that weren't geospecific didn't survive as well. So there was a dark star ceanothus that we sourced just because we couldn't find the other kind that we wanted. But it didn't do well with the wind. And Sunset Boulevard's super windy. And that was really, I think, one of the only plants that died. Consider other elements such as wind, like I mentioned, in pine needles. So we had some areas with pines where the soil acidity, pH was getting affected, so certain plants weren't doing well. Wildflower meadows actually weren't a viable long-term design option. They had to be renewed every 2 to 3 years. They just weren't reseeding well on their own. So we were kind of hoping that was going to anchor certain spaces, and it really just wasn't doing what we anticipated. And design planting for year-round pollen for the various pollinators and animals in the garden. So not just one season, kind of think through the whole year.
Sorry.
All right.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot. And these are some pretty pictures of what it looks like now. Now you can see it's starting to grow in. Here you have some of the wildflower meadows really just looking great. All the critters that came out. I think the funniest moment was when we were leading a BioBlitz with a bunch of high school students, and as we're waiting across the street, a giant blue heron decides that's when he's going to just gulp down a mouse. Just in full gross out fashion. All the high school students are like, ah! But they had really gotten, like a real experience of nature right across the street from their school. So that was great. You can see some Farewell to Spring and some Dudleya looking good, some Pearly Everlasting. You see it really starting to fill in some of these slides. Some ribes, some ceanothus, and some salvia, just really starting to fill in. And I think when they start to close the gap, that's when the maintenance is really going to get a lot easier for us. Like she said, Public Works will pick up the bags of green waste. They just dial 311. We come and get it. And then, and success attracts success. So I think even though this was a pilot block, it was only a block and a half, but I think because we did that, instead of just pausing the whole project, now there's a recycled water line that's going to be installed within the next 2 years. So when we do water, it's recycled water. We're getting 6 new gardeners for Sunset Boulevard in the capital budget. Woo, I know. And this project specifically is called out in San Francisco's Climate Action Plan that the mayor put forward. So Sunset Boulevard to be completed by 2030, and we really want to hold them to that. There's a Coastal Conservancy grant with San Francisco. Oh, time's up, but it's going really well, and success attracts success. And, we may not have time for our video. Okay. Thank you.
I can maybe just... There's a video online. I think it's on the CNPS Yerba Buena chapter website. This is a 360 planting video that the CNPS state organization came out to film of the boulevard, and I say a little blurb about it, but it seems like we're out of time unless we have a nod that it's okay to play it. It's like 1:40. I mean, I'm just going to play it and not even be a rebel.
Hi, I'm Solange Guillaume, and I work with Public Works in the Landscape Architecture Department. I am standing here at the corner of Terraval and 36th Avenue on Sunset Boulevard, and we're taking a look today at one of the pilot blocks that we've been working on Sunset Boulevard that was part of a planting and biodiversity focused master plan. Behind me is a wildflower meadow, and further on down the block towards the north are coastal scrub plantings. This pilot block started coming together through the cooperation of multiple organizations in the city. We had Climate Action Now, CNPS Yerba Buena, and Public Works. And within Public Works, it was mostly the landscape architecture team and the Bureau of Urban Forestry. But we came together with a lot of volunteers and a lot of hours and extra hours and got this garden together to serve as a pilot block for biodiversity. Welcome to Sunset Boulevard. I hope you enjoy exploring our beautiful wildflower meadow and our lovely coastal scrub plantings.
Thanks so so much, all of you. That was awesome. I want to remind everyone this is not a horticulture session. This is conservation. But you're going to hear a lot about horticulture, and that's by design. As they just mentioned, this is part of San Francisco's climate plan. Much of what these hyper-local restoration, community-based projects are doing is helping to fulfill those goals. It's a very important part of 30 by 30. And so in that spirit, I'd like to invite Charles Miller up to talk about restoration on the Westwood Greenway.
How are we doing, Dan? Sound good? All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. My name is Charles, as we mentioned, and I want to thank everyone for coming here today and coming to this session. I know you have a lot of choices, and I appreciate you coming to see what I had. Let's see if we can get through here. All right. So I am here to talk about the Westwood Greenway. My name is Charles Miller. I'm a sustainability advocate from Los Angeles, and sustainability training from UCLA. I'm also involved with advocacy for United States Green Building Council and their advocacy group. I'm lead green associate, and have, natives have kind of been my jam for a long time. And I'm going to talk to you about a project that is on a train line on the west side of LA. And here's what it looks like today. This is a stretch, if you're familiar with Los Angeles, this is a stretch between Overland Avenue and Westwood Boulevard. It's about 4 acres, and it's between those two streets right along the train lines right in the middle of it. It's about 2 miles south of UCLA, if you know Los Angeles, on the west side. Okay, usually I do like an hour-long presentation when I talk about this project, and I talk about natives, and I was talking to Brent from the South Coast chapter during lunch about this, and I talk about all these things, about how natives are the best way to do all these things if you care about sustainability, and they're really important avenue to get to all of these things. But you guys dig all that and know all that, so I'm not going to talk about that with you. So, one thing I will talk about very briefly, though, is fire, because I think as advocates and as coalition builders, one important thing we need to think about is how all the fires that are happening make the case for an urban landscape that is native. Everybody knows of the last 20 years, or I think most of us know, the last 20 years have been the hottest on record. Importantly, as we get higher temperatures, we get more fires. And as we have more drought, we get more fires. In my lifetime, and I'm not terribly old, but I'm getting up there. In my lifetime, we've gone from a 3-month fire cycle in Southern California, or really all of California, to a year-around fire cycle. And that's really crucial, because it means all of our animals, all of our plants, they can't keep up. I'm preaching to the choir, but it's important that you guys remember that when we're talking about advocacy and we're talking about local projects, this is something that may not occur to people. This is a fire that happens in the middle of the wet season in an area that's not even the driest part of the state, and it's a big deal. Some of these slides come from the Climate Reality Project. I'm an ambassador for that organization, if any of you are familiar with it. And there's lots and lots to show you in terms of how bad things are, and you guys many of you are familiar with this. But one important thing is that not only are the fires more common, they're bigger. And so it's kind of the worst of both worlds, because we're getting things, all the time, and they're bigger. So a lot of things that wouldn't have been traditionally damaged are not able to survive these things. And in fact, 6 of the 7 biggest fires that we've ever had in this state have been since August 2020. That's mind-boggling when you put it in perspective. Also, with the higher temperatures becomes more lightning strikes. Lightning has always been a cause of fire, but as we increase our temperatures, we get more lightning strikes. And some of our bigger fires have been directly caused by lightning. So where does that put us? It brings us to this cheesy photo I made for you guys with a lifeboat, and for those of you playing at home, that's Rhamna salicifolia. And we now face a situation where we need to think of our urban spaces as sanctuaries. 150 years ago, a bunch of white people came here and they said, hey, let's make it look like Europe, and we did all kinds of things to change spaces, because out there was out there. We can't think of out there anymore, because we need to think about preserving genetic biodiversity inside our cities, creating a refuge, creating a lifeboat for the life, for our animals, for our plants, and for the people to enjoy as well. And it's really important that we think about the fact that we can no longer dismiss the DNA factor in what we're doing. There are a lot of well-meaning people right now during climate change who are coming to us and saying, you know, what we really need to do is we need to bring these plants from really far away that are like from super dry areas, and that's what we need to do because then we'll be climate adapted in what we're doing. Our trees, our plants, our tiniest to the largest, have gone through some of the greatest genetic diversity proofing of anywhere on Earth, because we have some of the greatest variation of precipitation of anywhere on Earth. You know, in LA we have the La Brea tar pits, and we have like a 50,000 year record of fossils. And you know, you go back and you see the mastodons and the Columbian mammoth and the giant sloths and all these dudes, and all of them are wiped out. They ran into the problems of huge changes in carbon, huge changes in temperature, and changes in climate. You know what survived all of that? Every plant that's native to Los Angeles County today. And so in the fossil bed with all of these mastodons and all of these other, you know, dire wolves and things that we won't ever see again, what we find are coast live oak, Southern California black walnut. We find every single plant that is native today to Los Angeles. And so what we see is that our natives have built into their DNA a tremendous resilience to actually be able to take on climate change. And that's important when we're thinking about the changes that are coming. If we talk about street trees, it's a great example of how we've just kind of wrecked things in Los Angeles. 150 years ago, pretty much everything you'd see in LA was native, with the exception of, you know, a few olive trees down on Olvera Street, if you know downtown LA. Today, in the 470 square miles that constitute the city of Los Angeles, less than 3% of our street trees are native. And it's actually worse than that, because the vast majority of those are on the outskirts or right along the river. I live in the west side in a neighborhood called Palms, and there are basically no natives anywhere there except for a handful of ones that I've been planting and forcing into the system for the last 20 years. And that's the way most of LA is today. And you know, LA likes to walk the walk and talk the talk. And we've passed a huge biodiversity initiative, and we have a lot of well-meaning politicians who are receptive to the message of biodiversity. Yet in 2022, our urban forestry department planted thousands of trees, and nearly all of them were non-natives. I serve on the Community Forest Advisory Commission for Los Angeles, where we looked at their plans and we said, this is not what you want to do, guys. So we went around to every single site out of hundreds of sites with our volunteers, some of them far more educated on biology than I am. And we came up with 2 native alternatives for every single site. They planted 4. And there were a few other areas where they say they're going to plant some more. But by and large, it's 99% non-natives. That's what they're doing because that's what's worked for them. And so that's what we have to face as advocates, and that's what we have to challenge. That's why advocacy is so very important to what we're doing. You know, there's a lot of well-intentioned, there are politicians that say, you know, hey, I'm an environmentalist. Incredibly so. As a sustainability person, I can go up and talk to those people and have an educated discussion with them about water, about energy, about renewables, about all kinds of things, and they're ready to talk about them. But they're often not aware of the important role of natives in that entire process. And I haven't heard a single person really talk about politics in all these sessions I've been to. Granted, there's lots of sessions going on, so it may have come up. But we have to really think about the important nature of politics. We are all native plant advocates by virtue of the fact that we're here and we all dig natives. So cool on us. But it is really important that we get that message out to other people and that we engage on a political effort. Because I've gone to, you know, hippie groups in West LA where everybody's like, you know, leaning to the left. And I've gone to places where they just did a Trump rally. And I can tell you, this is a message that can track in both communities, which is not true for most of the things of the sustainability movement. It has not been turned into this big divisive football kind of a thing. And that's a really good opportunity for us. This is an opportunity where we can address issues of sustainability and address the low-hanging fruit in the environmental movement. I'll give you one statistic that always converts people who don't want to think too much about this. 70% of the residential water use in Los Angeles County goes to water plants and trees that don't belong there. This is at a time where people are complaining about whether or not you should have a swimming pool or whether or not you should even flush the toilet every time. And we've got all this water going to stuff that we shouldn't have there. We can drastically reduce that by converting our urban landscaping back to what it's supposed to be and promote biodiversity and a whole bunch of other cool things while we're doing that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the Westwood Greenway as a case study in terms of how collaboration can be a key to getting these kind of things done. Westwood Greenway is based on a train line. Today it's part of the County Metro's Expo line, which they're now calling the E line because they're always rebranding things. And the E line is on a historic right-of-way from a train track that was put down in 1875. So the dude who actually set up Santa Monica got this idea that, the only way Santa Monica is going to work is if I get all the rich people in L.A. to come out on their weekends and spend money. So he built a train line from the south side of L.A. all the way out to Santa Monica and, to convince people to do that. Now, over the years, as this filled in and became part of the city, this morphed into something called the Pacific Red Car Line as a commuter line. Many of you maybe heard about that. And then when that was killed through a rather controversial collaboration of people who were against public transit, that became a freight line until the mid-1980s. Now, one cool thing is that the city and the county worked together to keep that right-of-way intact for a couple decades after that, and they didn't sell it off despite some politicians being in favor of that. So when people got involved in advocating for it, that right-of-way was still there. Now, the cool thing about Westwood Greenway, and what creates an opportunity for us, you see that little really lame graphic I've created for you there with the green line? That's where the Westwood Greenway sits. And it's on the historic grounds of an old creek that used to be there where it crossed the train line. So Brown Canyon Creek is this spring-fed creek that comes out of the south side of the Santa Monica Mountains, and historically that's where it crossed this train line. Now, some people got the bright idea in the early 20th century that what we really need to do is we need to take this creek and put it in a storm drain underneath Overland Avenue. And so that's where it sits today, and essentially it just washes pollution from car waste and everything like that out to Santa Monica Bay. So that created our opportunity. That comes right under Overland Avenue, which is right next to the Westwood Greenway. So again, opportunity. Opportunity is what we look for as advocates. So when the Westwood Greenway was put in, the Metro has a 50 feet on either side right-of-way that they kind of own as part of that, and then the city has another 200 feet on each side, which they are given in order to build streets. For a number of reasons that I won't bore you with today, the streets were never built right in the spot between Westwood and Overland Avenue. So it is set mostly and used as a train staging area for the different trains that were there for all these different decades. I got involved as a sustainability person pimping out public transportation about 20 years ago. And when they were building Expo Phase 2, which is coming from, the right-hand side of your screen, to Santa Monica Beach, that's on that old right-of-way from the Santa Monica dude. And what we decided to do was to advocate for native landscaping on this strip. They had millions of dollars when they're going to build this light rail to landscape as part of the project. And so what I did was, I'll first give credit to Theodore Payne's foundation in Los Angeles. I was already advocating on sustainability issues, but what really took me to my finding religion moment was a lecture I attended that Lisa Novick, who is the former director of outreach, some of you may know her, she no longer lives in the country, but she was doing speeches on the time of why natives rock. And I've tried to kind of follow in her legacy. And, I then combined with a lot of different experts in the area. I see some of them in the room. Snowdy Doudson, Steve Hartman from the CNPS Santa Monica, LA Santa Monica Mountains chapter, the Mouthful chapter. And also, Bart O'Brien might be here. I don't know. He's around this week, and he was at the time at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Gardens. We were able to get these people to come together and talk about what the plant palette should be for this metro line. We did that. We put that together. We brought in our experts. We had all that together. We approached the Expo Authority, and we said, this is what you need to do instead of all the non-natives you have intended. While we're doing that, let's create a jewel in the entire process. Let's take the Westwood Greenway, where there's this extra right-of-way, and let's daylight that creek that's been turned into a gutter drain and let's move it back up to where its original historic grounds were, run it down one side of the train line, hook it under the train, bring it back to the other side, and the sunlight will disinfect the water, the native plants can clean the water, and then it'll run through a gravel pit to even further clean it before it goes to Biona Creek and then out to Santa Monica Bay. So, cool ideas, right? Jonathan Weiss is an attorney in LA, and this part was all his brain effort, and he really did a lot of work to make it happen. This is what it looked like in 2009. This is just hard pack. The strongest person in the room couldn't get a shovel all the way to the ground, I pretty much can assure you. You see a few non-native invasives that have come over from people's own residential yards, and everything else is just leftover staging from train lines. So we put together those experts that I told you. We took them the list of the natives that we wanted to use. They listened to us, they talked to us, they took us very seriously. And after about 2 or 3 years, they came back to us and said, okay, Charles, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put 2 native plants in the pallet. And then when we looked at the actual planting order, it was going to be less than 1% of the biomass of the entire project. We faced a lot of inertia of people just doing things the way they wanted to do it. Contractors with irrigation companies that didn't want to change how they did it. Contracts with plant companies that didn't want to grow natives. And politicians who have bought the greenwashing nonsense about drought tolerant is enough. That's where LA Native was formed. And it's kind of a group that I put together with a few other people, but it's not like some big, important, official thing. What it is it's an umbrella coalition. And in order to have change, we have to build coalitions for conservation that are based on stakeholder engagement. And so LA Native serves to form an umbrella with all these different groups and many, many more. We had almost 40 groups total that were involved stakeholders along this train line. So that means HOAs, that means public transit people, advocates, that means local politicians who dig what you're doing, that means getting involved with environmental groups that will be supportive of what you're doing. Certainly CNPS, TPF, Audubon, Sierra Club, all these different groups. All of them could agree to a very simple sentence that we put together that said, Metro, plant 100% native on the expo line because we live here. That's what we want. You work for us. And taking that to the politicians. Absolutely. By 2013, they kind of agreed in principle, and we broke the ground on this particular site. Some of the politicians showed up to glad hand everybody. You guys know that's an essential part of the process. You got to go through it. Then we took $5.5 million of public funding, and that was a big part of the process too. Some of the money came about, a little over half came from Los Angeles Proposition O and California Proposition 84. This is where the water cleaning part basically enabled us to do a native plants project because the city was in trouble from the Clean Water Act because they're dumping all this basically road waste into the ocean. And so we were able to, through a lot of different meetings on a lot of different time, access these funds. Most of this money goes to the land moving and to putting in the giant pumps to re-daylight this creek. Not a lot of it goes toward the native plants, as you can imagine. But it's still essential that all of these things work together. And it's county land adjacent to city land, so we had to go to meetings of both and get everybody to kumbaya all at the same time. So it's a time-consuming process. Here we are in 2009. This is Google Earth, so the time of day changes depending on their mood. There's 2013. You can see some action starting. 2015, the train line's going in. 2017, the train's up and running. Now the land works are going in. 2019, we don't have all the plants, but we got some of them that are starting to get done, and we've got the creek bed in place. And then 2021, the darkest of them all. Wouldn't that be the way it is? 2021, we've got the plants in, and they're all starting to really thrive. These are all photos taken from the last year. You remember that 2009 photo when I showed you it was all hard pack? All of these things are there now. And I'm not going to get into species and all that kind of stuff because I don't have time to do it. But we planted natives in this stuff that was basically forsaken land. And in an area of a city that's lost 90% of its butterflies, 90% of its songbirds, within a year, we saw ones no one in living memory had seen in this part of the city. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to encourage all of you to do something like this if you can. This is a simple 20-year idea. So I encourage you to look around in your community, whether you're talking about a tiny little town or you're talking about a big city. There are opportunities and projects and people out there with ideas that need somebody to advocate. And be the person who will go to the meetings. Make this your thing. Because we can all make an impact on a local level, especially if we stick with a project. I can go to something tomorrow and be the loudmouth, and if I don't keep going for 5 years, they're going to dismiss me, I assure you. You need to go and build the relationship. So every time the politicians see you walk in the room, they go, and that they know that you are there to advocate for those things, and you're going to be there for the long haul. Build relationships with neighborhood councils. Build relationships with local politicians. Get appointed to advisory committees for the city. Ask your environmental groups like CNPS, like it's Sierra Club. There's 100 of them out there. Ask them to take official position on your project and to endorse it. Ask them to be involved. And then connect the dots for the politicians. Go up to the politicians and say, it's not enough to say this California-friendly nonsense anymore. We've got to talk about native plants, and I want to hear it in your speeches if you want me to vote for you. And that's really something we have to put all together, and we are the people who are equipped to do it. I thank you very much for your time. My name is Charles Miller. If you want to reach out to me, try that email. I'm available. I love to talk about this. It's my jam. I'd be glad to help you in any way that I can. Thank you very much.
All right, so all these awesome projects need seeds. So Matt Garrambone's going to come up next to talk about how this Native Seed Partnership in Orange County is going and some of the lessons learned there. Come on up, Matt.
All right. Hello, all. Thank you for coming. My name is Matthew Garrambone. I am here from Orange County, California, where I serve on CNPS OC Board of Directors, but I also work for a conservation nonprofit called the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. I've been with them about 10 years, and most of that time has been spent working with seed. Seed is my jam. Collecting it, farming it, using it for restoration, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. So I want to thank Leaf and CNPS for including me in this session. This has been great. You all are awesome. And I'm going to talk about the Orange County Native Seed Partnership and how we're working to get more seed into the hands of more people in Orange County. And I'm going to start by sharing the long-term vision for this partnership, which was founded in 2019. You can read it. We're looking for an Orange County where there's sufficient access to what we call regionally appropriate seed that facilitates ecological restoration at scale. And we are keeping this broader vision in mind, but we are starting and building proof of concept by focusing on those doing restoration in what we call the Nature Reserve of Orange County and adjacent lands there. So the Nature Reserve is about 38,000 acres of protected open space established in 1996 under the Central and Coastal Subregion Natural Community Conservation Plan / Habitat Conservation Plan, or NCCP-HCP. There are multiple public and private landowners in the reserve, as well as several land managers, easement holders, etc. It's a really complex working environment, and it's a really collaborative working environment. I'm not going to mention all of the stakeholders here today. That would take like half the talk. I do want to, however, highlight the Natural Communities Coalition, who's leading this effort. They are a 501c3 nonprofit established to coordinate science and land management activities within the reserve system. And as part of their mission, they really help identify shared priorities among that stakeholder group and then help facilitate solutions. And so access to native seed has become one of those shared priorities over the last 10 years, and that is largely because we've shifted from these small-scale passive restoration projects towards a more landscape-scale active restoration strategy, which involves the addition of seed during the projects. So this was all documented. This shift was documented in the 2019 version of the official restoration plan for the reserve system. It also identified the need for a regional seed program to provide the seed for these projects, right? And we're not talking about just any seed. We are talking about seed that represents the genetic diversity and local adaptation of our region so that it performs well on your restoration site and that it doesn't negatively impact existing plant communities, right? So this is where regional seed partnerships can be helpful. And they can do a lot of things. First of all, it can just establish a network of people who want to talk about this issue. They can also help establish regional standards and best practices, which are kind of sorely lacking around this topic. You can consolidate and streamline contracts for wild collection and bulking, just making things more efficient, facilitate new species entering the marketplace so people like Charles can get them for their projects, and generally increase the quality and quantity of plant materials available to those doing restoration. So what does that look like? It kind of looks like this. It's essentially building a network where someone or someones can help forecast demand regionally, put that all together, select species that you're going to leverage your resources towards, and then establish contracts to do wild collection and seed bulking, get that seed cleaned and tested, and then deliver it back or put it into storage for future projects, right? Now, there are several, so that's how they operate in general. Anyway, for the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about how our partnership is being structured and how it's going to work, and some of the things we learned along the way. And before I do that, I just want to introduce quickly our core planning team. There's a lot of people involved in this project, but these are the ones I've been working with for the past 2 years, pretty closely and intensely. Lots of Zoom sessions, lots of after-hours phone calls, intense collaboration. So Mendel Stewart and Danny Fry from Natural Communities Coalition, Matt Major from Orange County Parks and Natural Resources, Sierra Smith from Sapsucker Consulting, and Julia Grubner, Diana Brand Ramirez, and Jonathan Dunn from AECOM. It's been great working with these people, and I'm glad that they trusted me to come share our progress with you all today. So the way this is going to work is NCC is going to serve as the umbrella organization for this thing. They'll take on most of the administrative responsibility and be fiscally responsible. And that makes sense because their board of directors consists of not only both of the wildlife agencies, but all of those landowner and land managers serve on their board. So ultimately, they will have decision-making responsibility over what we decide to do. There'll be a program coordinator who will focus on the plant material development aspect of all this, that cycle I just showed you in the last slide. IRC, we have a lot of experience doing this. We've been doing seed-based restoration and plant material development for about 10 years, and so we may serve in that role. That's TBD at this point. And then the advisory function will be served by a steering committee, and that steering committee is made up of representatives from both NCC and IRC, Orange County Parks, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, UC Irvine, Laguna Canyon Foundation, and the Nature Conservancy. And so this committee has been super engaged for this whole process. We've been working together for about 2 years. They've been attending monthly meetings, breakout sessions, just really helping us dig through some of the challenges that have come up along the way. They will continue to be involved in an advisory capacity when we move towards implementation, and will be tapped for various subcommittees as well. So anybody who's interested in joining this thing in Orange County will essentially sign a non-binding MOU. It's going to be super basic, like, hey, we are down to participate, and that's about it. And then anybody who's a seed user will enter into a much more specific and more formal service agreement. And that's going to outline the details of the relationship. And these are all going to be different depending on who the entity is and what their needs are. So it's going to outline what type of program coordination services NCC is agreeing to provide. Things like curating a wild collection geodatabase, curating a seed inventory and managing that, establishing all those contracts with commercial growers. And it will document it if and hopefully that they agree, if they are landowners, to provide access for wild seed collection on their lands. Depending on the scope of that service agreement, that entity will then pay in, essentially, a certain amount. It'll be sliding scale based on the scope. It provides them the opportunity to get seed. It does not come with seed. That is separate. So at that point, we begin working to assist these participants with their seed needs. And, we're doing demand forecasting, and we're going to get them to think 3 years out at minimum, update that annually. And then we're going to start working with commercial collectors and growers. And essentially NCC and the program coordinator serve as a broker in this model. And I'm going to be honest, nobody wanted this. This was not what people were asking for. What everybody wants is what we would call like a retail seed model with seed off the shelf. I want what I want, when I want it now. And that is just not feasible at this point. It takes a lot of time and resources to develop plant material. So we're starting with this. The goal here is going to be meeting those demand targets. It's not going to be building an inventory. We might build an inventory if we're lucky and we have good results in the field, but it's not the primary goal. So for anyone interested in kind of doing this type of thing, the expenses associated with that model, you got some startup. We're going to have refrigerated seed storage dedicated to this. We're going to have recurring expenses. Those are those contracts for wild collection and bulking. Those are what we call demand dependent, right? We'll also have expenses associated with the program coordination. We have already identified funding to cover the seed storage. We're going to invest money into the seed collection and seed bulking that will essentially stay invested in seed forever, potentially. That is really critical for our participants, especially those in agencies who just cannot come up with funding 3 to 5 years ahead of when their project is. This is what we hear all the time, right? So we're going to be able to essentially front that money for them, and then they can come to the table and purchase seed when they have their funds. The seed itself will be collected from within this provisional seed zone that's established as part of our genetic management plan. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept of seed zones, a quick primer. They essentially define the geographic area you can somewhat comfortably move seed around within without risking existing populations and without being at risk of poor performance on your restoration site. So empirical seed zones are kind of the gold standard here, and those are based on genetic data or informed by reciprocal transplant studies. They are very time intensive. There are not that many of them out there. So they focus on a single species. In the absence of them, people adopt what are called provisional seed zones, and these are usually based on either ecoregions, EPA ecoregions, level 3 and 4, or this system called the Bowers provisional framework. And so Bowers uses aridity metrics, essentially, to delineate zones, and they've done this for the entire United States. So we are adopting this, and it is a starting point, and a couple caveats about provisional seed zones. They are not meant to be long-term. They're meant to be refined as you have actual data for species. And you have to be careful. They are not recommended to be used with rare species. And you should always consider kind of local knowledge of local adaptation that might exist for species in your region, right? But we have nothing. I mean, there is nothing in California that tells you where to safely move seed around. So we're going with this, and if California Seed Strategy or other initiatives underway right now redefine seed zones for California, we will adapt and use those in the future. So this is how the partnership is going to work towards this mission, right? Which, like, if you remember, was pretty narrow, seed for the Nature Reserve of Orange County. But we're going to spend the next few years doing that, and hopefully it's going to go really well. I have a lot of confidence in this, that it's going to work out. But we're going to be focused on a really small group of species, and we're only working with a fairly small subset of people in the county. So the real challenge is going to be working towards this broader vision that is much more inclusive. And it's going to require bringing in more land managers, more seed users, and working more closely with seed producers in our area. And we're going to have to overcome some significant challenges to make this work. In Orange County, the majority of our open space is public land, state, county, city land. Seed on those lands can be considered a public resource, and we are constrained on what we can do with that seed, especially if it involves any sort of commercial activity or profit-based activity. So in a lot of other seed partnerships, what they're doing is developing ecotypes, and they're working with commercial growers to then allow those growers to bring them to market. And that's awesome. It's awesome for the partnership because we have limited resources and we want to use tons of species, but we can't develop all of them, right? We can't do it ourselves. So we really want to be able to partner with commercial growers to do that. It's also awesome for the growers because they know it's an established ecotype and they know that people are going to want it. So it's mutually beneficial. And if we can't do this, that's a real challenge. But I'm confident that we will overcome it. And part of my confidence comes from just how many people are focused on this issue now. And this is a real shift over the last 5 to 10 years. So there is this international, national, local coalition working towards seed-based restoration and plant material development using local seed. And I just want to give like a big shout out to some of the major players, and there are many more that aren't on this slide, but Plant Conservation Alliance with the National Seed Strategy, CNPS working on a California seed strategy, Institute for Applied Ecology up in Corvallis and in the Southwest. They have multiple seed partnerships and are now building a seed partnership network that will be kind of launched at the Spring Native Seed Conference, and that's going to be a hub for those of us doing this type of thing. You got the NRCS Plant Materials Centers, International Society for Seed-Based Restoration coming up with like international standards for this type of work. Great people doing great things. Just in Southern California, we've got Seed LA working to develop regional seed resources for those in Los Angeles County, and we've got the Mojave Native Plant Program doing that out in the Mojave Desert. So this is a really good time to be focused on this work, and this work is critical for scaling up restoration to meet the targets we are identified in things like 30 by 30 and our conservation plans for our regions. So with that, I'm going to close and say thank you very much.
All right, we're moving out of suburban urban areas and into the wild to talk about one of my favorite campaigns, the fight to save Conglomerate Mesa. Jora, Fogg, welcome on up.
All right, everybody need a stretch after lunch? A little sleepy? All right. So as we mentioned, my name is Jora Fogg. I work for a local advocacy conservation group in the Eastern Sierra called Friends of the Inyo. We work in Mono and Inyo counties. And I'm going to talk today about a campaign that's been going on for probably close to 6 years to protect a landscape called Conglomerate Mesa. And part of our journey here with this coalition was that it wasn't just this mesa now that we're protecting, but a much broader vision for landscape protection. So I did have a little bit of transfer issues here with this presentation from Mac to PC, so just bear with me here. This is the location of our campaign. This is a place-based campaign. We'll see Owens Lake to the west there, Death Valley National Park to the east, and the Inyo Mountains and Coso Mountains border to the north and south. So this is the Northwest Mojave. We're switching here from urban to rural. This is the ancestral homelands of the Timbishaw and Shoshone people, and they've stewarded these lands for time immemorial. I just want to recognize that. One of the core values of our coalition is to empower the tribes in the decision-making of this landscape, and our coalition is currently working with 2 sovereign nations on the development of this campaign. So this is a 160,000-acre area to give folks reference. So here's a view of the mesa proper with that beautiful Joshua tree woodland. So there is about 60 to 70% of this area that is extensive Joshua tree woodland. It's the western Joshua tree, and due to the high elevation, we're about 7,000 feet here, and the latitude, this is kind of the northern part of the Joshua Tree Range in California. This is really a climate refugia for this species, and it's basically a centerpiece of our campaign is protecting the Joshua Tree woodlands here. So folks might be aware that there was a proposed listing for the western Joshua Tree in 2019 that was accepted by the Fish and Game Commission in 2020. And it was voted on by the Fish and Game Commission back in June. Just a couple of weeks ago, the commission further delayed the vote. They had a new commissioner appointed by the governor. So the fate of Joshua trees is still to be determined in this state. For now, they remain protected, though. And you'll see on that map, this is the area I'm talking about that has that black line around it. Another really important species of this area is this limestone-loving Inyo rock daisy. It's a 1B2 ranked species. It's also a BLM-sensitive species. Both of those, I think most of us know that doesn't really afford any protection for it. So in February, there was a listing petition by CNPS, Center for Biological Diversity, and botanist Maria Jesus, and that resulted in an advancement to candidacy in August, which is kind of a low bar for the Fish and Game Commission, but we're really hopeful that the status review for this species will protect it. And what we're looking at on this map right now is known occurrences of this super range-restricted species that overlaps with a whole bunch of mining claims and mining targets. So central to our campaign is this mining threat that this area faces, which I'll get to in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about a couple other cool plants. The badger thread plant. This is a really interesting species that actually only emerges when there's adequate precipitation in the desert. Otherwise, its seeds lay dormant. And because of that, it was Steve Matson first photographed the species in the Inyo Mountains in 2010. And then, it was determined at the time to be an undescribed, or it was thought to be an undescribed species. And then it wasn't until about 2019 that it was confirmed and then formally described by a few experts who are probably at this conference that I would love to meet. And so that it was described in 2020. So really pretty new to science, not new to indigenous people, but new to our Western science. And it is the southern extent of the species range, so you can see known occurrences overlapping the Conglomerate Mesa area. There are other plant species. I'll just briefly, you guys can look at these photos. I'll talk a little bit about the Greasewood Dune system. It's along the edge of Owens Lake. It's the ancient lake bed, and these Greasewood communities are, really tied to these dunes. They're helping with air quality. They're holding cultural resources, and they're providing a lot of biodiversity for other plants and animal species that live in them. So really cool, unique system out there. Conglomerate Mesa also has a lot of cultural importance. As I mentioned before, the area is still used for pinyon nut harvesting, hunting, and traditional ceremonial practices. It is a place of solitude. There's really not a lot of people that come out there, but those that do are really enjoying hiking and camping, really getting away from the crowds that can sometimes convene on Death Valley National Park, and enjoying the dark skies, international dark skies. There is also pretty interesting and fascinating geological formations. I mentioned those limestone formations, that some of those rare plants are found out, but the limestone contains all of these abundant marine fossils, which are super important to the scientific record, and this is kind of a geological wonder that would forever be destroyed by mining, right? If you have an open pit cyanide heap leach mine, you're never going to be able to recover that geological record that we're still attempting to understand. And there has been 3 genera and 12 species of organisms found here that exist nowhere else in the world. So mining threats. I mentioned this before. Since the 1980s, there's been 11 companies that have come to the Conglomerate Mesa area. And the most recent is a company called K2, Canadian Gold Mining Company. And our coalition worked to basically, we couldn't stop mining exploration, so we fought really hard and successfully limited the first phase of drilling to helicopter access. So the mesa itself is about a 40,000-acre roadless area. And, mining companies, they generally like to build roads. And so by forcing political interference, to get them to do helicopter. But that exploration did go forward in 2020. And unfortunately, the mining company is still pushing back and very much interested in expanding their operations. They released a new proposal in 2021, which the BLM then turned around and issued a scoping period for which our coalition was able to generate 23,000 unique comments to the BLM in opposition to the project. And the BLM decided to go with an environmental impact statement, which is pretty unheard of. It does occasionally happen, but it's becoming more and more uncommon for EISs for exploration projects. So it's been a major success. And this is going to wipe the slate clean. There'll be a new scoping period, probably in January. That's going to be 45 days. And we're really hitting the ground running on that when it's time. So we had both this mining defense effort concurrently happening with this vision of protection for this area, right? So this, diverse group of coalition members who, as we've heard from our other speakers, we have these big groups of people, so it's just too much to mention everybody that's involved, but there's a few in this room today. And we're seeking a minerals role for this area, and working with the tribes to, craft a federal designation that's going to ensure co-management and co-stewardship. It should be noted that a minerals role isn't going to extinguish valid existing claims for minerals, but it will effectively stop an open pit mine, which would be the final outcome for this landscape if it were to go forward. And we really want to create that connectivity, right? That climate and wildlife and plant movement over time between these existing protected areas. You've got one of your largest national parks in California and 4 different wilderness areas. So this is really closing that gap. And the initial draft boundary that you're seeing here, and this is just really a discussion draft, it was developed through a consensus process with our coalition, which is pushing 20 different organizations at this point, as well as a variety of other people giving input, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, and then field visits and data collection, and that tribal input too. So a few things that I have noticed over the years of working in this coalition that I think can help us build effective coalitions to impact protections on public land is to really understand who is using the land and what they're using it for. And those are the people that you're going to want to connect with, and that's going to inform the decisions that you make. And really can't emphasize enough inviting tribal members, both those that are staff and in government and just members of the community, into decision-making spaces. Interesting tidbit of that is our tribal partners, they didn't really want to formally join our coalition, right? Sovereignty is of the utmost importance, but they're still participating in our coalition. So these, formalities of written agreements and MOUs and things like that, I just really encourage folks to think outside the box on that and create spaces that make people comfortable to participate who really have a more difficult time with those formal settings. And then, expand our coalition. So, it looks like this, in the last couple of days, people have really been talking about how diverse our coalitions are getting, and if we're bringing in other interests. We're thinking about businesses and faith-based groups and recreational users, right? And we're gonna find that commonality together when we do outreach to people outside the space of what we would think is traditional conservation. And then 30 by 30. We had a great session this morning about that. I always just get super stoked and inspired by the 30 by 30 partnerships that are happening. If you have a place that you really care about and you're working to protect, think about the 30 by 30 goals. Think about how does your project or your proposal link to biodiversity, access, tribal priorities, climate, all of those things. And then it probably goes without saying, but you got to bring people out on the land. And a place like Conglomerate Mesa, it's super remote. It takes 2 hours to get to a place where you can actually hike on rough four-wheel drive roads. So if we're thinking about access, we need to be able to provide the resources to bring people out there. And that takes time, it takes money, it takes asking people more than once, working around our schedules, being really flexible. But the more people that we can get out on the land, the more advocates we'll have for the place. Because people don't fight for places that they only see in pictures, or they can't touch and feel and see. I'll just wrap up real quick with, I just wanted to give a special thank you to the people in the Lone Pine, Death Valley, Bishop communities who continue to steward this place and fight for its protection. And particularly the tribal monitors who have been out on the land with the mining company, tracking everything they're doing, recording data, making sure that they're following the rules, and in the process they've rediscovered a lot of really special things. And then our coalition member, Maria Jesus, who filed the listing petition for the Inyo Rock Daisy and who has conducted her master's work out at Conglomerate Mesa. That's her thesis below that I cite. I think she would have been the best person here today to talk about this campaign, but you got me instead. And she's just really invaluable to our campaign, and I know she wishes that she could have been here the last few days. And if you want to learn more about how to take action on Conglomerate Mesa, you can visit our website at protectconglomeratemesa.com. And I will be around for the rest of the day. So thank you.
All right. So for our last presentation, I asked my colleague Sam Young, he's the head of our Important Plant Areas program here at CNPS, to talk about his work, because I think it's going to be a very, very powerful tool for collaboration going forward. So Sam, you want to come on up?
Full button. All right. Hi, everyone. As Lee said, my name is Sam Young. I run the Important Plant Areas program at the California Native Plant Society. How many of you have stopped by our table in the exhibitor hall and played with our map yet? A few of you. All right, cool. Well, if you haven't yet, maybe you'll want to after you see this, but it went on its own. So today I'm going to talk to you about what important plant areas are, how we're modeling them, and where preliminary results are. Is it on this computer? Hey, all right. I'm figuring out technology. Biodiversity is on the decline on a global scale, as we all know here. The global strategy for plant conservation was adopted specifically to address plant biodiversity declines as a part of the Convention on Biological Diversity in the year 2000. This initially called for protecting 50% of the most important plant areas for conservation. However, this begs the question, what are these important plant areas? Plant Life International published criteria for identifying important plant areas in 2002. And I will say that at the subsequent conferences of the parties for the Convention on Biological Diversity, these goals were updated to 75% conservation by 2020. And the Conference of the Parties will be meeting in Montreal just a couple months from now in December to negotiate the next decade's strategies and goals for biodiversity conservation. California, as we all know, is a global biodiversity hotspot, one of 35 recognized in the world, with more than 6,500 native taxa. 25% at least are found nowhere else. Some people say as high as 35%. East Bay chapter of CNPS, separately from the global Conference of the Parties and the Plant Life International's IPA criteria, had gone through its own botanical priority conservation area mapping in 2006 for Alameda and Contra Costa counties in the East Bay. The Governor's Office has issued an executive order declaring September 7th the Day of Biodiversity and calling for implementation of the California Biodiversity Initiative. This was back in 2018. More recently, this has been updated, and the state is focusing on 30 by 30, which for those of you who are not familiar with it, is conserving 30% of California by 2030. And this equates to roughly 6 million more acres into conservation. We do have a lot of unique biodiversity here, but it is a competing demand of resources. We have a growing population and a housing shortage. We're one of the largest agricultural producers in the world. And with SB 100, as well as other energy development, we need to power homes and provide energy for folks. So what can be done? I apologize, some of my slides are a little out of order. I might have had a transfer issue, so I'll just skip through this to talk about 30 by 30 and SB 100. For those of you who are not familiar with SB 100, there's 100% renewable energy by 2045. As such, this will involve building some utility-scale renewable energy development, which provides a need to have smart siting of renewable energy so that we don't unnecessarily compromise biodiversity in the effort of meeting our climate goals, as well as making sure that we can get the most bang for our buck in terms of biodiversity for mitigation. IPAs can come into the picture for this, as it's a central repository for existing data. We scraped the internet for all public biodiversity data sources and kind of combined it together. We filled in the data gaps at regional workshops throughout the states, from Northern California into Baja California, and everywhere in between. And then pulled together, I don't know why it's advancing itself. We pulled together modeled and surrogate data to fill in the blanks between areas and highlight survey needs for data for areas. Our modeling process has been very transparent and collaborative, and I'll kind of go into some of the details on how we did that. And it's been a little bit different from most modeling process, and this grassroots led. It's from the bottom up. We built a frame, and our stakeholders and collaborators in our regional workshops really kind of helped us fill it in and provided feedback and helped us reiterate this model over and over and over again. And if anyone in this room wants to look at it and give us feedback, please come by our booth, get my card, email me. This is like a very open process. We're seeking to not reinvent the wheel, but complement existing efforts. Filling in information gaps and providing data sets that aren't normally accessible for things like RCA, RCIS, MCA places, complementing things like areas of conservation emphasis, CEQA and NEPA general planning documents, and those environmental impact assessments, and any sort of CISA, FISA listing documentation, NCCP, or supplementing CNDDB veg camp and CNPS plant inventory information. A timeline of kind of to put this into perspective is in 1992 we had the Rio Earth Summit establishing the Convention on Biological Diversity. 2000, as I mentioned, the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation was adopted that specifically focused on conserving plants worldwide. Separately, in 2006, we had our East Bay chapter establishing botanical priority preservation areas. And in 2016, CNPS started expanding on those BPPAs for the East Bay and looking at a more statewide program for important plant areas. This was determined successful, and we got some more funding, and in 2018 we formally established an Important Plant Areas program where I was brought on board to take the project by the horns and do it in full. This year we will be releasing Important Plant Areas. We're in the process of working out some bugs with our public side interface, but once we get that straightened out, again, grab my email and we'll make a big announcement about it, but it'll have a lot of bells and whistles. So this works through data gathering, expert workshops, an iterative and collaborative modeling process, analyzing the outputs to look at threats data. So not only where are IPAs, but what sort of aerial coverage do we have? How does it intersect with existing conservation goals like 30 by 30? And where are our imminent threats from urban build-out modeling, climate change, sea level rise, nitrogen deposition, and invasive species. And this will be a living document. We're always going to have reiteration and further review. And so just because, and this is what I've been telling people over and over again, just because feedback doesn't get in this time, it will get into the next iteration, and the one after that, and the one after that. This will be continuously updated to reflect the most up-to-date information. Our regional workshops were interesting. It was essentially me gathering as many email addresses as I can and spamming all of you to come look at my maps. We did them in person initially for the first couple of years, where we both had RTS Online web data collection applications, where we just present as much data as we could possibly load into the application without crashing our computers. And then providing paper maps, again, with a lot of data displayed, and then providing access to as much of the other data sets that we weren't able to display digitally just because of bandwidth limitations and memory limitations. I will say at the end of the day, we have 4 terabytes of data that went into this, so there are obviously limitations to what can be streamed over the internet. With the paper maps, that was a lot of fun, but there were some complications and issues with digitizing them after the fact. And with COVID-19 coming into play, we had to transition to more of web-based webinar training and review periods following the web training for people to contribute data after they've had a chance to learn the online data contribution tools. All of this comes together in our model schematic here. It's a lot broader and harder to look at if I put the actual one, so there's a simplified graphical version. But we have our data sources that are binned into 3 categories. These are rare species, rare vegetation and habitat features, and botanically significant areas. I want to highlight that in our botanically significant areas, we have ethnobotanical and cultural areas highlighted. This is something that when we started out, we really wanted to have the conservation priorities for indigenous communities reflected in our results. California's patterns of biodiversity are shaped by the land stewards who have been here for millennia, and it would be an incomplete picture of biodiversity without their input. What we found throughout the process, through some trial and error, is how to set up important data sovereignty agreements to make sure that tribal information is well protected, controlled by the tribe, and ultimately benefits the tribe. So we ended up putting a pause on that, and once we kind of have IPAs initially out, we'll be re-engaging on a statewide effort to build those tribal relationships and really make sure that we can take care of that information in the right way. I do want to kind of really look at these rare species, rare vegetation habitat features, and botanically significant areas, because these were designed to reflect the Plant Life International criteria for identifying important plant areas. So that criterion A, criterion B, and criterion C are reflective of these data categories. The reason for that is that we are hoping to, and we've had a lot of good collaborators with our friends in the UK, talking about IPAs and getting our California IPAs into the international databases. This provides kind of a local to global action pipeline where at things like the Conference of the Parties for the Convention on Biodiversity, where California is a subnational observer and the United States is also an observer, that we can both have the international attention to things like we have our 30 by 30 at the state. If we have kind of the international map saying, well, here are those areas, you can meet your 30 by 30 goals, both from the local end to the global end, it provides a lot more legitimacy. And so with that, just to like show some stats on how this kind of comes into play, we've got our 16.8 million acres of IPAs, of which 14.5 million acres are in California. From the 30 by 30 pathways document, 6 million of these acres are considered conserved. That leaves 8.5 million acres presenting opportunities to meet 30 by 30 goals. And I'll remind you, the state's goal is 6 million acres by 2030. We can more than meet 30 by 30 by targeting IPAs. And these are the sorts of kind of figures we'll have available on that online dashboard. So how do IPAs get used? We've got NGOs and advocacy groups. A lot of times those of us on the advocacy side are ending up reacting to projects, which can be an uphill battle. You have project proponents who are heavily invested in projects and really want to see it go through because they don't want to lose that investment. And so if we can kind of come at it from ahead of time and protect areas and identify the important areas before they become under threat, it becomes easier to get them into a protected status because you're not fighting somebody along the way. Land conservancies and conservation planners, this provides transparent and data-driven tools to guide land acquisition and use decisions, as well as from the larger scale planning and general planning perspective. It provides areas, one, to avoid sensitive biodiversity areas, like you can look at a map and say, okay, these are IPAs. It's not meant to replace due diligence like CEQA and environmental impact assessment, but it does give you an indicator that like if you're going to put your project in there, you're probably going to get a lot of opposition to it. So it's not like, it's kind of like a heads up. It also kind of on the flip side can help you get the most bang for your buck for your conservation mitigation dollars. So you can cite mitigation inside of an important plant area and make sure that you are conserving the most biodiversity possible. Regulators and policymakers, like I said, with if you're writing your general plan or if you're at the state level looking at 30 by 30, kind of figuring out which areas to prioritize can be a complicated effort, and we're happy to share our data with you since we've already gone through it. So I know that I kind of squeezed in here at the last minute, so I did trim my presentation down quite a bit. I do have more slides, but I will leave it open to any sort of questions or anything after the fact. What I do want to say is thank you to everybody. We had more than 500 folks contributing feedback to our process throughout the last 4.5 years. And we have quite a bit more information available, and you can come explore our maps and kind of look at how the model works if you come see our table in the exhibitor hall. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'll be around after the fact to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, let's give all these great speakers a big hand for today's session. Thank you. Wonderful. So, I don't know, I'm inclined to go 5 minutes over. How do folks feel to give us a chance to maybe ask a few questions? So, could I have our speakers come up here? And we'll just come on up here, and actually we'll just keep it casual so some of you who need to go can go. But our speakers are up here. If you'd like to come up and ask some questions one-on-one, please feel free. I really appreciate all of you coming today. It's a really important session. So thanks again to our speakers today. Thank you.